Juror number 6, Evan Higginbotham. Well, he helped deliver the guilty verdict in the Donna Adelson trial that will likely keep her behind bars for the rest of her natural life. And now he's joining STS to tell us what really happened inside that jury room.
Welcome to the global phenomenon, Surviving the Survivor. Here's your host, Emmy Award-winning journalist, Joel Waldman.
What's up, STS Nation? Welcome to Surviving the Survivor. This is the show that brings you the very best guests in all of true crime. And occasionally we bring you some of the best jurors that just sat on one of the highest profile cases in all the nation. Tonight, it is a rare one-on-one conversation with juror number 6. Again, his name is Evan Higginbotham. He sat through the entire Donna Adelson murder trial, as did I, but he had a much more important job as a member of the jury panel of what ended up being 8 men and 4 women. We'll get his age if he's willing to give it to us. He's on the younger side, and all along, the projections were that this was a much younger jury than typical, which is interesting considering a 76-year-old woman was on trial for her life. Without further ado, here he is, juror number 6, Evan Higginbotham. The guy's a good-looking man, and we were having some camera issues, so I'm glad we got your mug on camera. Evan, welcome to Surviving the Survivor. Thank you so much for being here.
Hey, thank you so much for having me on.
Yeah, I appreciate it. So, going into this trial, what did you know? I mean, I was there for jury selection. It started August 19th. When that voir dire process started, number one, did you ever imagine being picked? And number two, what did you know about this case?
So I grew up in Tallahassee. The extent that I knew of it was that at the time of the murder, whenever in 2014, I heard that it happened, but I was 14 years old at the time, so I didn't really pay attention to anything. And then I moved away at 18, so I had heard nothing further from that. My impressions whenever I came in to the jury room was I couldn't figure out who the defendant was between them and the 2 defense attorneys.
Wow.
And yeah.
That's interesting. So, how long did that last where you weren't even sure who the defendant was? And it's interesting because Donna, and I'm sure you know her name now, Jackie Fulford, her defense attorney, they look somewhat similar. How long into the process before you realized who was the actual defendant?
It took fully until the second day of jury selection because they, for the first day, they brought us back and individually asked all the questions. And even when I walked back there, I thought I would be able to figure out by then who the defendant was. And I left first day still not knowing.
So that's someone that definitely doesn't know that much about the case, which is a relief because you want people, who really have to learn the story and then make this extremely serious decision, which you guys came to in a relatively short amount of time, which I'll ask you about shortly. Before I get there, can I assume by doing some of the math that you said you were about 14 at the time, so you're around 25 now, is that right?
That's right. I'll be 25 at the end of this year.
Yeah. And I mean, what was your relationship like with the other jurors? I mean, I know you're not supposed to discuss the case, but were you guys friendly with each other? Would you go grab lunch, that sort of thing?
So I didn't really ever grab lunch with the other jurors at all, mostly because it was freezing in the courtroom, as you know. So by the time they let us out, I was just itching to go walk around outside. But no, I enjoyed my time spent with all of them. They're all wonderful people. I don't have a bad thing to say about a single one of them.
And now that it's over and you're getting these requests, and I know you did radio in Tallahassee and you're doing this is your first podcast, which I appreciate very much. I mean, what have you learned in terms of the magnitude? This is arguably at the time the highest profile case in the country. Are you surprised to learn that?
Yeah, I wasn't aware of that really until after the verdict had been served. I finally was allowed to go home and look into some of like the reporting on it, and I was like, wow, I didn't even realize how massive this was being reported. Which
Yeah.
makes a lot of sense in hindsight, seeing about all the changes they made to the jury process during that, with us being escorted around and them holding the galley until we fully were off the premises.
Yeah, I mean that's something, by the way, that people don't know. But I was sitting in a gallery every day, and when the jurors would be escorted to the back, and it was, let's say, lunchtime, we were not allowed out till the jurors left. So that process for you, you guys were kind of the VIPs, right? So you were let out
Right.
ahead of us. Did you realize that that's what was going on? That you were
I
getting
didn't at the first for the first few days. It was about, I think, like one of the first days of the second week where the bailiff had said something that made me realize that that's what they were doing whenever they pulled us to the back and let us out that back entrance.
Yeah. So take us back, and we'll go a little bit in chronological order. Then I'll jump ahead. But just to jury selection, you get called. You're one of hundreds of potential jurors, and you get through the first round, and then it's the voir dire. Just what was that process like? Did you just assume, hey, I'm a young guy, I'll eventually get kicked out of here, and I won't have to deal with this, and then suddenly you get picked? What was that revelation like for you?
I never expect that anymore. I'm 24, but I have been selected, or I've been called for 5 times now for jury duty. So it's almost
Whoa.
every year that they get me, and it's a different experience every time. But this one was very different. I knew there had to be something interesting or different about the case. Whenever I came in, and they just had us all sat in the gallery, waiting individually to be questioned by the judge and the attorneys.
So you've been called 5 times in Tallahassee. Have you sat on other juries?
No, so I was called twice, or no, I called once in Tallahassee. Whenever I turned 18, I got called immediately,
Mhm.
and then twice in Gainesville, and then twice since I've been back in Tallahassee.
Wow. You got to play the lottery, man. I bet you could make a lot of money.
I don't know if I would count that as good luck, but it's some sort of luck.
Well, you're hitting the numbers, that's for sure. So going back, you said I guess you were 14 if I had the age right when Dan Markel was murdered. What do you recall about that time when you initially, I mean, I'm sure obviously you're 14, you're high school or just doing your thing, but did it kind of register at all that this was a big deal in Tallahassee at that time?
I don't think it registered to me at all. I was kind of a goofball kid, to be honest. I didn't pay much attention to anything like that. And I had heard that it had happened. I had heard like school faculty talking about it because I think I was in like 8th grade at the time.
Mhm.
But I did not realize, like, until they started bringing up the evidence, the circumstances of his murder and how bizarre of a case it was.
Mm. So now that the trial is over last week, and you've had a little bit of time to reflect, and again, I know media is reaching out to you. I guess from like a 30,000-foot view, the bird's eye view, what's your biggest takeaway from this experience? What stood out to you the most?
Well, this was a really life-changing thing for me because I up to this point I'm a student. I have been pursuing my engineering degree, and this had been, and I'd always like considered law school in the back of my head as something that I may enjoy. This fully being there and seeing the attorneys interacting, for me, fully changed my perspective on stuff and made me shift my. I went and changed my major yesterday actually to pre-law.
Ah, that's amazing. So is that now a path because of this? I mean, do you plan on going to law school? Where are you in school, undergrad?
Right now, I'm at TSC in Tallahassee. I'm planning on transferring to FSU to finish my bachelor's, and then probably looking into the military for a route for law school.
Wow, that's incredible. So, that just gave me the chills because Dan Markel, as you know, was an FSU law professor. And the fact that this trial, despite the horrific nature of it, is now swayed you into wanting to become a future lawyer, I think that would have put a huge smile on Dan Markel's face. So, and I speak to the Markel family, so I'm going to let them know, and I'm sure they'll watch this. So that's very unique and interesting that it. I mean, what about it? I guess um, created this urge in you to suddenly shift gears in your life because that's a pretty dramatic change.
Yeah, a big part of it was seeing the prosecution and how well they had it together and how passionate they were about this case because that's something that they've been working on. Miss Kappelman has been working on for I don't know how many years now. I was just reading something about it the other day. I know she was the one who was there for the prosecution of Charlie's case. That was like the big swing for me that made me interested in it.
Well, it's funny because you've got the Georgia Bulldogs, the University, but Georgia is a pit bull kind of, and she was just I don't know if you know, she's voted prosecutor of the year, and she's the best of the best. And Sarah Catherine Dugan, her co-counsel, a
Mhm.
co-prosecutor. They're two of the best. And you're right, they've been super passionate. So in terms of Georgia's um in terms of her abilities, I guess, did did it far outweigh the abilities of the defense team in your view in the way she was presenting the case?
I don't necessarily think, because I don't want to disparage the defense team at all. I think that they did the best that they possibly could working with what they had. I think that the state had built a very strong case against Miss Adelson.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, I think that's the extent of it. I wouldn't say that. I mean, it's hard to weigh someone's skill, especially me. I'm not in that field yet, so it's hard to say. But I can say I was very, very impressed by Miss Kappelman and Miss Dugan.
Yeah, and it's interesting, and not to harp on your age, but I've got you by over 25 years, and just to hear I was not nearly as mature as you. As, I know you said you're kind of, you goofed off in high school and stuff, but you seem totally with it. And I said the same thing because I get a lot of heat being the host of this show. People love you and they also hate you a lot. And it's easy to criticize. And I think I was pretty hard on Jackie Fulford, especially. Um, but you're right. I always talk about being the man in the arena or the woman in the arena, and she's out there and she doesn't have a lot to work with. What did you think of Jackie Fulford? Because she's kind of quirky. People say she's like a Tom Petty lookalike, and she just has a very odd delivery. Did you find that? Yeah, you personally?
I did think so. I found a little bit of the way she presented the case a bit strange for me, and that might be a generational thing there. Because she's got some years on me as well. And in a case that I found to be so compelling with the technological evidence, with everything from the cell phone tracking and to the Star Metro cameras, security footage, her putting herself up in front of the jury, and in front of everyone, and just throwing out how unaware she is about technological stuff, I didn't feel like was a great start with an opening statement. And I'm of course not going to hold like a ton of weight to that, but it's just I think that there were certain things like that which I might have been missteps.
Yeah, she got up there for people who didn't see that part of the trial and said, I don't know what Skype is, and this is during opening statements. I think that was an opening statements, and she was playing up the fact that she was kind of folksy and didn't know how to use the technology, and she had like old school um, posters of Dan. I thought that was actually weird too, like for their presentation while Georgia was and Sarah delivered these kind of meticulous PowerPoints. Um, Jackie Fulford had this literal cardboard poster of Dan side by side with Donna. It didn't even really make sense. You didn't really even know who they were at that point.
Right.
Did that kind of throw you for a little bit of a loop to have those two huge photos behind her?
For me, it felt a lot of like a viewing at a funeral is kind of how it felt, and I don't know if that was like part of the intent there, to tug at like heartstrings at all. But I don't know. Everyone has their taste in how they present things, but I did find it strange when they were putting these giant photos of Mr. Markel and Miss Adelson in front of me as a juror who has no clue who either of them are.
um, so I was watching you guys very kind of diligently. And I consider myself a fairly good read of people. And it's funny because I gave them I want to say it's juror number 5, actually. It might but I have to double check. But um I called him Sprinkler Man. He was a career military guy, bald head with a white goatee sitting in the front row in the middle, and the guy next to him with the ponytail. And I was certain that he was going to be the foreperson because he had this military experience and just the way I watched him in the voir dire process. But we all know that the jury foreperson was a 26-year-old woman who's now been speaking publicly, and she's just a year or so older than you. She went on to TikTok. Did you have a chance to see that? And I'm curious what you thought.
Yeah, I had seen that on there, and I get a little bit of being compelled to go on a platform and want to talk about it right after. I mean,
Mm.
I can't judge too much. Here I am. Uh, I don't know. I also am right there with you, though. I also thought juror number 5 would be the foreperson, and he was someone who, during whenever we were looking to select our foreperson, was like, "Yeah, I'd be willing to do it, but she came out and said that it was something she was really interested in wanting and wanted to do. So all of us were like, yeah, if you want to be the foreperson, by all means.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, I was, after Charlie Adelson's trial, I think to this day, no jurors have spoken, at least not to us. So I've been surprised because you came forward. Sprinkler Man, as I call him affectionately, he reached out, and I'm going to have him on the show as well. It's interesting to see kind of the change from one jury panel to another. But what I was starting to say before is I think I'm a pretty good read of people, and I don't think I remember. You guys were almost like a professional jury in the sense that you were all paying incredibly close attention at all times. There's a woman in the back row closest to the gallery, and I was calling her note taker woman because she was just taking notes. A very just at a constant rate. She was jotting down notes. But all of you guys, almost at every moment I would look, were really like leaning forward and paying really close attention. It's obviously a testament to the fact that you guys took this really seriously. Where did that come from, other than Judge Stephen Everett?
I think, well, that first of all, I think everyone wants to do a good job for Judge Everett. He's just a very likable guy. But I think for me, like with my experience with past juries, I've come in and been like, well, what can I do to get out of this? And whenever I got in there and felt the gravity and realized, wait, this is a serious case, it was one of those things where I kind of had to switch gears and take it seriously as it deserves, because she deserved a fair trial just as anyone else does. And I think we all, or everyone on that was selected for the jury, I think was mature enough to realize that and want to give it everything that they had to make sure it was fair to her.
And it's really refreshing to hear you say that, because you want to make sure that a woman who's getting convicted for the rest of her life, even at 76 years old, which I know to you feels like an old woman, but closer you get there, the less old it feels. I'm just glad to hear you took it that seriously. We're going to get back to the serious stuff, but I can't tell you how many times I got people emailing me since announcing that we're going to have some jurors on. They want to know, because he announced it in court, Judge Stephen Everett, that he got you guys snacks from Costco. How were those snacks? Were they worthy?
They were great, yeah. And he not only did he get us snacks, not just one trip, but two trips. Because when they started to run low, he was immediately filling them back up. It was and he didn't cheap out. It was nice.
I'm very happy to hear that, and he made it clear in court that happened. And I understand that you guys put your little verdict or individual verdict slips into one of the snack containers. That's what the TikTok juror said. We'll get back to that, but I've been kind of circling the wagon here. But in terms of reading the jury, I felt like I was reading you guys pretty well. And then the day that Rob Adelson, the estranged son, testified, I felt sort of collectively like that was the moment that you guys were in complete lockstep. Am I close? Like, did that testimony sway you guys a lot, or no?
I think he had a very compelling testimony. I think that him being being part of the family speaks a lot to the character of the people that he grew up around. So I think everyone felt that same way about it. That I mean, he doesn't necessarily have anything to gain from this trial going a certain way. He is kind of in the worst possible scenario on that.
To me, it kind of seemed like one of the key moments in the trial where the jury sort of coalesced. I assume you guys all thought he was obviously a credible witness, and after the fact, you probably learned that he was in a hard spot being estranged from the family.
Yeah, I felt terrible for Rob, especially at the end after the verdict was returned, and I got to learn more about his situation with his family. And it's really sad. I hate that he had to do that. I agree with Miss Kappelman on that. He probably was a really integral part to that case. I know that for me was a big sway in how I perceived Donna's character, because that was one of the people that had the most time spent around her and most experience to share with us.
Yeah, and that's certainly how it came across to us, that he was offering um so much texture to who she really is. And I think that, that was probably very important. As a guy who's 24, 25 years old, what was it like for you after court every day? And this went on into 3 weeks worth of time, to not be able to look stuff up. I mean, were you actively sort of avoiding? I don't know how active you are on social media, but did you have to actively avoid social media and even, I don't know, contact with friends, just so you weren't finding stuff out that you strike me as incredibly honest and serious about this job. So how difficult was that part of it?
I was very lucky to be unfortunately busy. So between this, because the jury selection started on my second day of classes for the semester, so I was really working to keep up with that while
Wow.
also working. So a lot of the times I would leave court with enough time to try to go to work, and I was still working on the weekends while doing that. So I didn't have as much trouble as I thought I would have, because I was honestly just running around too much to really be looking into it.
So hold on, you were taking classes, going to work, and sitting on the jury all at once?
That's right.
Wow. So were you taking taking your classes online? Because obviously you're not going to class during the day, right?
They're in person, so I would get back and I'd try. I had luckily made a couple friends in the 2 days before the guy went on jury duty. So they were taking recordings of the lectures that I'd go back and take notes on after I'd get done with jury duty.
Wow, man, kudos to you. And that's a problem in this country, because I think you get paid. I'm not even going to ask, but it's like some ridiculous number, like 15 or 18 bucks a day. So
That's right.
yeah, they've got to increase pay for the jurors. So let me ask you this: when Georgia or when Sarah actually laid out the opening statements, um, how long did it take you to kind of put the story together? And you're looking at this woman who's 76 years old in a sweater, and they made the comment at the onset, basically saying, there's no look for a killer. A killer can look like you or me or anyone. How important and powerful was that to you?
I think that I had that in my mind going into it. That you can never really judge a book by its cover, and that's the truth. Whenever the prosecution gave their opening statement, I the way they laid it out was very concise, and they made the story and series of events very easy to read and pick up. But at the same time, you're not supposed to give any additional weight to that. What they're showing you is the state's case and what they want you to show, and that the opening statement's not evidence. So anything that I picked up on that in the beginning, I needed to keep with like a grain of salt and still be open to the defense pointing at it and saying, well, it's not fully accurate.
And were you taking notes? I mean, you guys had monitors there, and I know how closely you were paying attention, but were you like physically taking notes, or were you just trying to consume everything and keep it up, in your
So
brain?
when I first started, I took notes on more than I probably needed to. And as the trial went on, I started to just jot down what I felt like were important points instead of writing down as much as I could.
Can you
But
give us
I
can you give us like a quick example of that? Like from the beginning, you were writing down everything, and then what would it kind of switch to mid to end trial?
so at the beginning of the trial, when the first witness took the stand, I think it was Mr. Markel's neighbor. I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but
Jim Geiger.
Geiger, that's it, Mr. Geiger. I immediately like jot down his name, wrote down that he was a witness called by the prosecution, and then pretty much everything that he said, I would try to jot down as close to what he said as if I was like being the court reporter almost.
Wow.
And by probably like 5 or 6 witnesses in, probably like third day or so, I had changed that and kind of just focused on listening and making sure I was taking in all the information that they were saying. And if something stood out to me, then I would jot it down under my
Like,
witness notes.
do you remember something that like stood out that you're like, I gotta write this down?
Not off the
I
top
mean,
of my head. I know there's plenty of it. I know during Drina Bernhardt, during her stuff, I wrote down stuff that didn't feel like it made full sense. Or Miss Bird, I would jot down stuff that they said that maybe would be able to be shown as not making them fully credible.
so let's go there. I mean, what did you think of those two? I mean, that was very interesting because the supposition by the state was that these two jailhouse informants were basically manipulated by Donna, and that Donna even wrote the script. And when the handwriting analyst came in, she didn't say it was like X percentage likely, which is what they usually do, that it was Donna's handwriting. She said that is Donna's handwriting. But you're saying that you found them lacking in credibility. So how did that testimony from the two of those women that you just mentioned, Patricia Bird and Drina Bernhardt, how did they factor into your decision?
I tried to give them as little credibility as possible, being that they have a stance to gain from the trial going a certain way. And that was what I tried to see for every single witness that went up there. If they have something that they could gain from Miss Adelson being found guilty or being found innocent, I would like to hold that in less regard than a witness that has nothing to gain from it. But not to say that the evidence that was brought up with Miss Bernhardt wasn't compelling, because I'm grateful that they had the expert in handwriting there, and what she showed us was very interesting. But you could have put those two pieces of paper on the screen, and I could have told you that was her handwriting. It
Yeah.
was just very clear.
Yeah, I mean, but was that powerful for you though? The script, I mean, that she was literally, they tried to make it seem like it was being that Donna was writing down what they were basically telling her orally, but obviously, I think it's pretty clear that it came from Donna. So was that bit of evidence powerful to you?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad that, as awful as it was to sit through the entire hour-long audio-less video of them sitting there and writing in the book, as it was good to see that, because you could very well see that it wasn't a situation of just Drina sitting there hovering over Donna, making her write something so that she could take it to the lawyers to try to get a deal. It was very much a back and forth. You write this, here I turn it around, I'm writing this, and Donna was an active participant in
And
that.
correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that video was played by the defense, if I'm not mistaken.
They wanted to play a snippet of the video, and then they sent us back into the jury room and they discussed it, and then the prosecution said that they wanted to have the entirety of the video published if they were going to show it. And I think that was probably a good decision, even though it
Um,
was grueling to sit through an hour of just nothing but watching a woman write in a notebook.
and I remember that. I mean, people were hungry. I think we were heading into lunch, or right. Some of those days were tough to get through. But since we're talking about some specific witnesses, one of the last days you had this divorce attorney, Linda Bailey, who basically got up and made the comment that $80,000 isn't a big deal, and basically that divorce wasn't that big a deal. And a lot of people thought that was self-destructive for the defense to call that witness. I'm curious what you thought of Attorney Bailey.
For me, it felt like a waste of time. Like, uh, I don't think that it was like self-destructive for the defense to bring her on. I think that at that point, the prosecution had kind of made their case, and the defense had done the best that they could to dismantle it with what they had. Bringing Linda Bailey on wasn't going to really sway my opinion, unless she could have said something far more compelling than what she was able to while she was there. You said you were watching the jury the whole time. I realized it even when I was sitting there. Had a very emotive face while watching that, where I was getting increasingly frustrated while Linda Bailey was speaking. The comparison of talking about how, as an attorney who works in this as a day-to-day, that Ms. Kappelman was the point that she was trying to make, completely either going over her head or her skirting taking accountability of that point, was incredibly frustrating to me. And I felt that the example of the garbage man and the stinky bag of garbage was a great use of that. And even after something as simple as that to pick up was given to Miss Bailey, she still refused to say it was a valid point.
Georgia's so quick on her feet with that. It was that. And what do you make of the now that you've brought up the stinky garbage? But another metaphor she used is the powdered donuts as circumstantial versus. Did that help you? That visual? There's a meme going around with Donna with like powdered donut stuff all over her face. So did that meme? Not meme, but did that visual that Georgia laid out, did that help you with circumstantial versus direct?
For me, I like to think I'm pretty sharp and was able to pick it up without it. But I think for some people, as that for during jury selection, she said it to everyone while we were in the process. I think some people needed that. I think to be able to understand the difference between direct and circumstantial evidence, and that sometimes circumstantial evidence tells you more than direct evidence does.
Yeah, and I'll tell you what, man, you sound incredibly sharp, and I'm not trying to blow smoke up your, you know what, because you're on my show, but I can tell you at your age, I don't think I would have had the wherewithal to sit on a jury. I don't know. I would have had, um, even at my age now, just sitting there, it was hard. It was hard to sit there every day. Because I mean, did you feel like it was grueling at times just to, get through some of these long days that weren't that, like the Sergeant Chris Corbett? I mean, he has one of the most important jobs. I mean, what did you think of the digital forensic evidence that was
I ate
there?
that up, honestly. I could not have been happier to sit there and listen to Chris Corbett talk. And whenever I spoke today on the Greg Tish show, I said they asked me that same thing, and I immediately was like, "Yeah, my favorite witness was Chris Corbett." It was fascinating to see the investigative work that went into that, and I'm also a little bit of a nosy person. So whenever they were playing like the phone calls between like Charlie Adelson and his mom and Miss McManawa, even that was able to retain my interest for the majority of the time.
Yeah, and it's fascinating to hear that because look, when most people hear the two words digital forensics, they kind of tune out. But a lot of cases today get solved because of that. And without Chris Corbett and without Pat Sanford of the FBI and without Detective Craig Isom and all these other people, there wouldn't have even potentially been a trial. And this is amazing. I just want to underscore that, and I hope Chris Corbett hears this and hears what you're saying because I think he'd really appreciate it. With that said, so you just said you thought Sergeant Chris Corbett was among the best witnesses. Is there another witness or two who you thought were fantastic?
Uh, as far as me taking what they said into account into my verdict, I can't say that there's necessarily one outside of Rob that stands out a ton to me. But as far as like ones that I was personally interested in hearing that side of it, the undercover agent who did the bump, I was really interested on a personal side of just hearing about that because it's interesting stuff, as
Yeah.
well as the digital forensics that the witness that the defense brought on as well, who they hired out of Oregon. I was also fascinated hearing that as well.
On the defense, the digital forensics on the defense side, you're saying?
Right. I
Yeah,
think I forget what her name was, but they brought the lady on who flew out from Oregon to
yeah,
go through Chris Corbett's
yeah.
slideshow.
Yeah, yeah. I forget her name too, but I'll tell you this: I've become friends by doing the story so often with Mister Bumpman, and he watches every show. So next time I'm in Tally, if you're around and he's there, I'll introduce you. He's a great guy.
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, he's a teddy bear of a human being, and he helped break this case just by quote unquote tickling the bump. I mean, what when you saw that bump, you see this big scary dude who's actually again a teddy bear in real life. Um, what ran through your mind? I mean, that's obviously something that you see in the movies, but it's happening in real life. They're quote unquote tickling the wire. I think I said tickling the bump, but they're tickling the wire, and it worked beautifully. I mean, they got both Charlie and Donna to speak. Just what was running through your mind watching that?
It was really fascinating to do, and it honestly felt like watching an episode of something like CSI. It was really interesting to see, and I think that it did a lot to reveal like character during that. I mean, if a strange person comes up to me and goes to hand me a paper on the side of the street, I also would probably be adverse to wanting to touch the paper at first. But then once I've taken it, I'm reading what's on that before or seeing if there's any strange substance on there before I put that into my bag. And that stood out a lot to me, is that just didn't feel natural at all.
Super interesting because it's like the small things. You're 100% right. Like any one of us, some stranger comes up, you're gonna look at it, you're gonna read it. You're gonna probably call police if you're not gonna just go across the street to pick up your grandkids. And first person she calls, that's why they call it tickling the wire, is Charlie. And when you find that out in succession, um, at that point, earlier on, you said it wouldn't have mattered as it relates to Linda Bailey because at that point the prosecution had quote made its case. I wrote that down. So when in your mind's eye, when did the prosecution make its case? Was it the bump? Was it another point?
I think that the bump and then going through all of the phone calls kind of really did it for me. By that point, I had started to form an opinion, about how I felt I was leaning on the case, which I worked really hard to stay on the fence through the entirety until we got to deliberation. Because she, like I said, she deserves that as the defendant for me to hear both sides with the same amount of interest and amount of attention before I make up my mind. But I feel like by the end, when they rest their case, I felt pretty strong that the prosecution had built a really solid case against her.
So it's so interesting to hear this, because the whole time that you're sitting there on the jury, we're all out here in the outside world trying to figure out what you're thinking. So now to hear you talking about what you're thinking is very interesting. One of the more tension-filled moments came at the end of the trial, after the defense witnesses, and you probably found this out after the fact, but and maybe not, because the defense really hinted at strongly at the fact that their client was going to testify, that Donna was going to take the stand. And then there was this really dramatic moment when you guys are not in there, where Judge Everett's basically asking Donna, okay, what's your decision? And she just couldn't decide. And at one point, Judge Everett, who is like super sweet guy, total effervescent, beautiful personality. It's hard to get him annoyed, but he got annoyed a few times during this trial. And when Donna was sort of vacillating and looking at her counsel, didn't know how to answer, he basically said, look, I'm going to hold you guys in contempt if I don't get an answer. And that's where she said she's not going to testify. And then we found out, you guys didn't know this, but that night she apparently had a change of heart. And it was such a serious change of heart that Georgia didn't sleep the night before the verdict. She only slept like 3 hours, because she was now preparing for what she expected to be Donna taking the stand. It never happened. When you never saw Donna take the stand, were you wondering why? Did you scratch your heads and say, why didn't she take the stand?
I never expected her to take the stand, honestly. I would have been shocked to see her get up there, especially after now in hindsight seeing how Charlie's went. I wouldn't want to get up there across from Miss Kappelman. She would tear me apart.
What do you think of her cross on other witnesses?
I thought she did a fantastic job. There were constantly things that she would bring up to the witness that I wouldn't have thought to ask as the prosecutor.
Yeah, I don't know if you know this or not, but her dad played quarterback at FSU and went on to have a pro NFL career. So she's got that competitive spirit. I asked her about that, but she is. I mean, you're literally watching her and Sarah both, but Georgia is literally prosecutor of the year. So you got a very good lesson in how to cross someone there. From Georgia Kappelman, who was like salivating at trying to get after Donna. And we're going to get to Wendy in a little bit, but let's focus a little bit on Donna here. And then I'll have you take us inside the deliberation room. What, I guess, as you watch Donna through the trial, what stood out to you? Did anything stand out to you? Did you try to remain neutral? I mean, I know you did, but it's hard when there's certain reactions and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I tried. I did my absolute best to pay zero attention to Donna as if she wasn't in the room. Which I feel. I think I did never speak to anyone about this in deliberation, but I feel like that's probably what everyone on the jury was doing, because that's not something that we can hold against her in the deliberation. It's not evidence. Her reaction to something in the courtroom could be due to numerous factors that are outside of like what happened in the timeline of this case. So I did my best to not pay attention to her being behind or being with her counsel.
And that's fascinating that you're kind of treating her as sort of the invisible woman, because we're all, what is she wearing today? Did you see her roll her eyes? Would you pick up on eye rolls and things of that nature?
I hardly looked at her.
Really? And what about, I don't even know. I mean, I'm sure you know now, but her husband was right behind her. This is the first trial where I think any family members had actually stood by someone's side. But in this case, Harvey Adelson was behind her. He's kind of a grouchy looking guy in general. But did you know that was him? Did you know that was her husband at any point?
Yeah, he's a pretty easy guy to identify. So I think he was there for the entirety of the trial, because I noticed him, I think, day 2 that he was there, and they had his picture up on the screen, and I was doing a
yeah, you're doing making sure that the police sketch is right. What about
right.
on the flip side, on your side of the gallery, You had the Markels there. Did you know who they were? Were you able to figure out that this is Danny's father and mother and sister?
I actually didn't know that they were there until after the trial had concluded. Whenever a friend of mine had sent me um, their victim statements that they did,
Hmm.
which I watched for the first time earlier today. I felt that they were very compelling, and I'm glad that they had the chance to speak. I'm very grateful that Judge Everett gave them that chance.
Yeah. So what? I mean, I'm going to follow your lead. What stood out to you about either victim impact statement?
I think that as much hurt as they've felt throughout this entire thing, I think they did a good job of staying level headed when giving their victim statements and not letting anger or like any strong feelings like that overpower them rather than speak about how it's impacted their family, and not only their family but also the Adelson family, how one person's selfish decision destroyed families.
What about the time lapse? So again, you're 14 and in high school when this crime happens, and now you're 24, 25. It's 11 years later. Was there any concern in your mind, like why did it take so long? Maybe they had the wrong person because it took so long. Did that ever factor in questioning the time lapse?
Yeah, I mean, when I had heard about this happening when I was 14, would hear people talk about the FSU or reference the FSU shooting whenever I was like 17, 18, and then a couple times probably when I was like 20. So I had fully thought that the case had concluded. I didn't know it was still an ongoing thing. So that was one thing. Whenever that we had sat down and I had gotten selected for the jury, I was very interested to see what caused the investigation to drag along the way it had. And a big part of that is because of how smart the co-conspirators were with how they did everything. They insulated each other from so much.
What about that train car analogy that was used? It's kind of like you've got the conductor in the front and the engineer in the back, and I thought that was a really powerful analogy, but they're all going and traveling and getting to the same point from point A to point B, which was the murder of Dan Markel. Was that a metaphor that kind of helped you gain clarity in your own mind?
Yeah, I think that that's a good visual representation for someone to understand, like the the red string tied around the thumbtacks that this is.
Yeah.
I thought it was a good representation.
And what do you think of Luis Rivera? So he's the Latin Kings gang member. He testified with a tattooed neck. And I'll tell you why I'm asking, because in every trial, the vast majority of people say, well, he was the most credible witness because, he doesn't really, he's sort of just telling the truth as this thug gangster. Curious what your thoughts about him were.
Yeah, and like I said, whenever someone has something to gain from the trial going a certain way or from testifying, I try to hold them with less validity to their statements. But with him, I felt very much that he was being honest. I felt that he was uh, finally at least representing himself in like an honorable way there. Uh,
Mm.
but I did try to, when in deliberation, anyone that was like a convict in this case who was testifying for any sort of deal, I tried to hold in less regard and use that as less weight.
Were you expecting so a few times, more than a few times, and we're gonna get to Wendy toward the tail end here, but she kind of threw Donna's kids under the bus, meaning Charlie and Wendy. You don't really know who they are. Um, did you I mean, I know you learned through the case about Charlie. Did you expect to see him there taking the stand?
I felt like that may have been a possibility. I couldn't remember when they read out the witness list if he was on there or not. But I honestly did. I thought it was more likely for me to see Charlie on the stand than it was to see Donna on the stand.
Oh, interesting. Um, in terms of defense witnesses, and then we'll dig into Wendy and Charlie a little bit more. But obviously, you said Sergeant Chris Corbett was a huge witness for the state, as was Rob Adelson, and I think those are two people that I would have said are incredibly important. Now, these character witnesses who came on to basically talk about how wonderful Donna was. I mean, to me, I'm a New Jersey guy originally. They were just straight out of like Queen Central Casting. I don't feel like they added anything. The friends I'm talking about now, we already talked about Linda Bailey, but what did you think of Donna's friends? They help, hurt, or didn't really do much?
Great friends, terrible witnesses, but That's kind of how I felt about it. And those are friends that are till the bitter end, it seems, because they were willing to get up on that stand and what felt very much like being dishonest up there about everything.
That's very well said, man. I'm very impressed with how observant you were, because that was the feel that we got. So, one of the more uncomfortable, and then we're gonna get into the deliberation room, but one of the more uncomfortable moments, and I rewatched this with a body language expert, Dr. G explains today, was when Wendy, now the daughter and sister of Charlie, daughter of Donna, takes the stand. She and her mom have kind of been on the outs. So Donna was staring right at her. And I'm sure you're not picking up on all this because you don't know all the dynamics, but we rewatched it today. And Wendy physically turned away and looked at you guys. She looked at the jury. She didn't look at her mom. Were you feeling any of that tension between Wendy and Donna at all?
I was not at all. I mean, like I said, I did try to do my absolute best to pay zero attention to Donna because I didn't want any of her body language to garner any sort of sympathy or feeling that she was or feeling of guilt, because I shouldn't be making any decision off of that. So I
Mm.
did my best not to pay attention. So I really didn't notice anything between her. I did notice that Wendy did look to the jury a lot more than uh, some of the witnesses did during her
And,
testimony.
and what did you think of her testimony? She was a little different this trial than the other trials, which you might go back and watch. I don't know, but this trial, she was a little more, I guess, vulnerable. She's been a little more antagonistic in other trials, but here it's almost like she realizes the gravity of where she is and what could happen to her next. But curious what you thought of her.
That's what I felt. I felt that she was very together whenever she came up on the stand, a lot more than I would have expected. With all of this, her brother being convicted now, and now her mom being on trial, I would have thought her to be like more of a mess than she was, and she kind of held it together and didn't speak a ton more than I felt like she had to. And I think a big part of that is probably that she's been instructed to, because she is likely next down the line to be put on trial.
Interesting. I'm gonna ask you more about that in just a minute. Before we get there, though, so her ex-boyfriend, Jeff Lacasse. He is the ex-boyfriend who's a social worker professor at FSU. He gets up there and basically says that Wendy was making sure that he'd be around the day of the murder, and the implication is that maybe she was going to have him be the fall guy that day. Curious how he came off to you. Some people really love Jeff and think he's, absolutely credible, but I've heard others say, he's like this snubbed ex-boyfriend, which I don't buy personally, but I'm curious your thoughts on his testimony.
I think if you're sitting on the fence of the snubbed ex-boyfriend, that's kind of a crazy stance. It's been several years since they've. I would hope that if that's the case, he'd be over it by now, and at least for that. I thought what he said was pretty compelling. I mean, from Wendy questioning his schedule when he was going to be in town, and then at the same time, the Sigfredo Garcia renting a vehicle that was almost identical to his really was scary to see, because that very well, if Sigfredo Garcia didn't get that traffic violation after renting the Altima, he may very well be in prison for something that he did not do.
Yeah, that is 100% true. Then there was a revelation. This is a new piece of evidence. There's some new breadcrumbs that came out that also sort of implicate Wendy a little bit. But one of the interesting ones that kind of cuts both ways is in Donna Adelson's planner, and she kept these obsessive compulsive planners. The state discovered that she had Dan Markel's license plate number for his 2008 Honda Accord. I mean, in my opinion, she's getting that from probably one person, and that's Wendy. But for you, in terms of conviction with Donna Adelson, or at least going into the deliberations room, did that piece of evidence factor in that she had this license plate number?
Yeah, that was actually that came up more than I thought it would in the deliberation room, because part of our hang up is proving intent prior to the murder happening, which of course the time before the murder there's not an investigation, so of course there's going to be less evidence within that time period.
Mm.
So that was one of them that was very much compelling for potentially showing intent during that. I mean, how holding on to that, because she did not have it for the Odyssey, which was strange. For as like compulsive as she was, and keeping insanely detailed notes, you would think that if she's going to have one of the license plates, it would be at least Wendy's and not Dan's.
Excellent point. I agree with you, and I probably would have felt the exact same way. The other, I think, obvious huge piece of evidence, as it relates to Donna, is you got this incredibly wealthy family, and her son gets convicted, and she's arrested 1 week later, trying to flee on a one-way ticket to Vietnam via Dubai. I've said this on the show 10 million times. Like, at least if you bought a round trip ticket, you may have thought, as juror number 6, Evan may have thought, yeah, they were just going to try to clear their head. But that one-way ticket, did that impact you? Did that influence you to say, why the hell were they just going one way? Were they really just getting out of here?
I think if it was just the one-way ticket by itself, that would be a little bit more weight for me. But for me, what did it even more is the blatant Google search of non-extradition countries before then purchasing a one-way ticket. I don't think you can spin that any other way than what it is.
I don't mean to laugh about a serious subject, but her explanation for that was, then if she was in a non-extradition country, she would be free, and then she could go turn herself in more easily, which was just absolutely absurd. But that's absurd as Charlie Adelson's own defense, that he was extorted by the hitmen who had to drive 8 hours out of the way to eliminate the one person that all the Adelsons wanted gone. I mean, just again, like, forget the deliberations for a minute, which we're going to get into in just 1 second. But what do you make of the fact that here you've got this affluent family? The husband's a successful dentist. The brother is this wealthy Ferrari driving periodontist. The daughter's a lawyer. They're living, they've got everything. And it gets to this point where this domineering mother meddles so much in the business that she turns her son effectively into a murderer, because he's now a convicted killer, and now she's going away for life. Like, how do you process that as a human, putting aside being a juror for a minute?
It's interesting how you can have so much going for you and manage to fumble it, you know? And I don't know. There is some truth, I think, to that money and power corrupts, but I don't know what the case there is. I guess you feel like you're untouchable and that you can get away with just anything, and then reality sets in whenever you're on trial for it.
Yeah, maybe you should maybe become a philosophy major, and I like your take on all these big life issues. But so bring us into, we're in the third week of trial, and you finally hear all this evidence, and all this testimony, and you go in to the deliberation room, and you guys were in there for a fairly short amount of time. Just take us inside. Most people don't know what it's like. I mean, you guys are literally in a room off, I guess, the judge's chamber. And how do you guys start?
Well, that's also what's interesting, is that I expected to get in there and for everyone to like kind of explode into speech and wanting to get their points out. But we got in there and everyone was just insanely cordial and polite. Like how we started was everyone looking at each other and going, "Where do you guys want to start now?" We didn't start off by like picking a side or anything like that. We went point by point for each for each charge that she had, and we put it up on the board and then went around and voted on how we felt about that specific charge and where we were at currently before digging into any more evidence, just based off of the closing state, all the evidence provided after the closing statements. And whenever people would raise their hands and say, "I'm not certain," I can't say I'm fully certain that she did that or that I would be able to convict her on that charge. We would go back through and pull out evidence and note evidence down on the whiteboard in the jury room. So I felt like it went really, really well, and everyone was really polite. I expected a lot more fighting.
Interesting. And I know you talked about the jury selecting the jury foreperson. Just to go back to that for a minute. So again, a 26-year-old woman. So she basically, when you guys got back into the deliberations room, and now talking to you, honestly, I'm surprised you weren't the foreperson, but she basically raised her hand and said, I want to be the foreperson. Is that how it played out, essentially?
We kind of, well, someone posed it. They're like, so, because the bailiff came back in, they're like, "All right, you guys can select your foreperson now. I'm going to step out." And then after they stepped out, we all kind of looked around for a second and we're like, well, who do you guys think it should be? And a couple of them spoke up and said, Mr. Sprinkler. I had been suggested by a couple of them, which I was flattered, very much appreciated. And after that, we all stopped and we're like, well, does anyone want to do it? And she spoke up and was like, I would love to be it. And all of us were kind of okay. Yeah, absolutely.
But Sprinkler Man was in the running.
Yeah, for sure. I would have picked him if I had to pick somebody. That's who I thought it would be.
All right, I feel a little bit better about my my read of people. So obviously the most serious count is count 1, which is the murder charge. So did you start with that? Did you start with the most serious charge?
We did. I felt we started. I think we just went in numeric order because I guess that's just how your brain naturally wants to go.
Yeah.
And we found that after we spent probably close to 2 hours talking about this and laying out an incessant amount of evidence on this whiteboard, we finally all came to a consensus and we spoke about it, and we all felt that we could agree without a doubt that she was guilty of count 1. Then we moved to count 2, and it became easier because that's a lot of the stuff that we talked about that was applicable to count 1 was also applicable to count 2 and 3.
And count 1. So how, from the time you guys entered the room, you picked a jury 4 person. Do you remember when you first took a vote by hand of count 1? Do you remember what the split was?
I think it was 9-3. That 9 of us felt, after seeing all the evidence presented in the courtroom, that we felt without a doubt that we could make our decision on it.
Okay, so it was 9-3, and now
it may have been 8-4, but it was pretty much 2/3 were comfortable.
Now the other third, it's not that they were adamantly against it; they were just unclear about the instructions and the count. Is that right?
Yeah, we went through very meticulously, reading through the jury instructions to make sure that we were following those with everything that we were laying out.
And so, do you go from, let's just say it was 8-4? Do you go then 9-3, 10-2, or was it okay? We went through everything, and now those 3 or 4 jurors say, okay, we're okay. We vote in the affirmative.
A little bit of both. I mean, we would lay out everything. I mean, us that felt more comfortable would lay out why we felt more comfortable, and without pressuring at all, which was something that I was very proud of this group, and I felt that incredibly professionally acting group of people.
Mm-hmm.
There was never any sort of social pressure or pushing for anyone. There wasn't any sort of bickering or anything like that. It was very much, I completely understand why you may feel that way. Here's why I do not feel that way. And here's the evidence that led me to not feel that way. And then we would go around until eventually people may have changed their mind or come to feel more comfortable being like, okay, yeah, I see that point and you're right.
Wow. So, again, just like in its totality, from like the 8-4, let's just say, or 9-3 split, time-wise, how long would you say? Was it like 20 minutes? Was it an hour? Because you guys were basically back there for 3 hours. So just, do you have an idea time-wise until you got the, the totality of all 12 jurors?
For count 1, it took probably about 2 hours before majority of the time that we were in there was on count 1. And then it became easier after we went through all the evidence and talked about how we came to our conclusions, which witnesses stood out to each of us, how what we thought of the evidence. We pulled up some of the digital stuff again, like some of the calls we pulled back up to re-review, which took some time. So it was probably about an hour, 45 minutes, 2 hours till we finished, and everyone was on the same page and felt fully comfortable on count 1.
And then the rest basically fell into place. And you guys, as far as I know, you had no questions for the judge, as far as I know.
That's right.
Yeah. So you guys were able to sort it all out. Now, was there any other stuff that you looked at, like transcripts, anything else that what other things were you looking at a second time?
We pulled back up some of the videos and we were provided a transcript for them in there. We also, while we read through the transcript, we also all reminded each other that the transcript is not evidence. The video is evidence. So if you're reading something, that's not necessarily what is being said. It's what you're hearing. It's what's being said. Wow. So we also were trying not to rely on the transcripts too heavily. So we didn't even pull out the transcripts for any of the videos we watched until someone decided that they wanted to read back through it to compare what they were hearing.
And inside the jury room, is there a deputy watching you who sits in there, or they're all outside?
Yep, everyone's outside of the courtroom. It's only us in there.
Wow.
Or outside of the jury room.
Yeah, wow. So fascinating. So you guys finally come to a conclusion on all counts. And I understand you guys would write it down. Is this true, on a little sheet of paper, and then drop it in one of the empty snack bins that Judge Everett got for you?
So that was actually JC, the lady who's been posting on TikTok, our four-person. That was her idea, which I felt was I felt like it was a good idea, because we wanted to avoid any feeling of social pressure at all in this, and make sure everyone's verdict was their own and only their own, and all of ours in totality.
Mhm.
So part of avoiding that was we wanted to make sure that if anyone had a feeling that they wanted to say, if anyone had felt that they weren't fully certain they could convict and they felt that she was innocent, that they were writing that down without other people staring at them, waiting for them to say it. So yeah, we wrote down on slips of paper and put it into a snack bowl, and then she read through all of them and they were all guilty on all accounts.
Um, I mean, I can't say it enough. It's just so interesting to hear this. So now you guys come to your conclusion on the counts, and um, it's got to be, no matter what you think of the person, which and I'm glad to hear that you weren't really judging. You basically had said previously in the show that you almost looked at her as this invisible human being, which is probably a really good way to approach it, because you don't want to be, prejudiced in any way. But when you come to that decision, it's got to be really heavy, knowing that your decision is going to put someone in prison in Florida. Life is life. So you're putting someone in prison for the rest of their natural life. Is that something you guys even mentioned, talked about? Is that something that crossed your mind?
I think we all felt that a little bit going in, and we would reference that whenever we would stop and break down evidence, because even when we all felt comfortable, we're all leaning toward a certain way. We
Mhm.
broke down evidence and went through, like, even after we drew the slips of paper and we all felt guilty. I forget what number he was. Seth Rapp was another juror in there. He was like, I still feel like we should break down every point that the defense, because he jotted down every point that the defense made in their closing argument. He said, I think we should go through each of these and discuss them, just so that we can make sure that we give the most fair possible trial, and that we are going through each of these points that the defense made.
Incredible. So now we're at the moment of truth. The judge calls you in. Do you look at Donna? Did you look at her? Do you remember when you sat down before the reading of the verdict?
Yeah, that's when I finally had started paying attention to her demeanor a little bit, which I kind of wish I hadn't, because I don't think it did me any good. Not that I'm necessarily losing sleep over it, but
Mhm.
I expected, after we got out there and we published the verdict, that I said this earlier this morning as well. I felt that I would feel some form of satisfaction, or feeling that I had done some great good. And I feel like I probably speak for everyone, that it's just, all I felt was just sad that this was the situation at all.
I'm so happy to hear that, because that's how I feel. And it's a weird thing in the world of true crime, because there's no winners, right? I mean, justice is served, but it's not like it brings Dan Markel back. And just going back to the victim impact statement from Phil Markel, he talked about all the, even Charlie Adelson's child being a victim in this, and Luis Rivera's kid. So it's not like it's this happy ending, but justice is ultimately served. So Judge Everett obviously, gets the verdict and he's as about it. He has about as commanding a presence of a judge as any judge you'll ever find. And, he's this larger than life personality. And now he reads the verdict, and you hear count one, guilty. And I will never forget that wail, that screaming that came from Donna. Did you notice that? And what was your reaction to her reaction?
Part of why I didn't necessarily jump at being the foreperson is because I didn't know how well I would be able to read out, because I didn't know that they were going to be, that Judge Everett was going to be publishing the verdict, and I didn't know that if I were the foreperson reading that out, I didn't know how well I would be able to continue reading after a reaction like that. So
Mm.
after sitting there and seeing it, it very well made me realize, I was like, yeah, that's rough. I don't know that if I were the one to be reading this out right now, that I would be able to keep my full composure, like stone face, like a Judge Everett was able to.
Yeah, it's that's a great point, because in different jurisdictions, the jury foreperson will be the one that sometimes reads it out, right? So the verdict is read, obviously, for for the Adelsons, it's a devastating moment. For the Markels, it's a moment where they're finally getting justice after 11 years. You guys are there, and I guess you were there, or were you? Oh, you didn't hear the victim, so you were not there for the victim impact statement. So the verdict is read. You're escorted back out. The judge thanks you for your duty. What's that feeling like when you sort of walk back to grab your coat and leave the courthouse after 3 weeks?
Really surreal feeling because I had gotten just used to coming in and seeing all these people every day too. And I said that as we were walking, I was like, "Dang, I'm gonna miss all of y'all now." Like I've grown a liking to all of my fellow jurors, and it was really weird because it kind of something that I had no idea that was I was going to be a part of this until it just suddenly happened, and it kind of took over my life for 2.5 weeks.
Mhm.
So it
Um,
was a weird feeling switching back from that.
do you think you're going to stay in touch with any of your fellow jurors?
I don't know. I'm open to. I didn't really get anyone's contact information, but I know if I see them at any point in the future that we're going to be friendly. So yeah,
All right, so I got to ask you the final thing, and this is what's on everybody's mind. In the duration of the trial, Georgia Kappelman offered up some breadcrumbs related to Wendy Adelson. Did they? I don't even know if you're allowed to tell me, but I'm going to ask anyway. Did they poll you at all? Like, did either the state or the defense? I mean, were you asked by the state um, if you know if you were on a jury for potentially for Wendy Adelson, would you a grand jury or whatever, would you find enough to indict her? Were you guys asked about that?
as of this point in time, I haven't spoken to the defense or the prosecution in regards to anyone outside of Donna Adelson's jury selection.
So let me ask you, what do you think of both Wendy and Harvey from the evidence? Harvey did not testify, but from what you learned about Wendy, and if you were a grand juror, do you think there's enough to indict her? Do you think that they will go after her?
I'm sure that the evidence that they presented for for Donna Adelson is not the same that they would present for Wendy. So based off what I've seen, I can't say with full certainty that they would be able to get a conviction based off the evidence that they have here. But I think that from the evidence I've seen, I think that my personal opinion is that there's some sort of involvement there that may be worth looking into in an investigation, which of course they're going to continue pursuing, I'm sure.
Well, Georgia Kappelman's years just perked right on up there. I'll tell you my personal feeling. Uh, is there's this family is so enmeshed outside of Rob Adelson. I just don't know how there's any way that uh, Wendy would not have known. Particularly, with all this code language. What do you make of the code language, like the birthday present and all these things? Did that become obvious to you that they were speaking in code?
Yeah, that one stood out to me. A lot of once you notice it once, you can't stop noticing it that they're obviously speaking in code. And that was one of the things that we talked about within the deliberation room a little bit too. Is that there's a majority of the evidence comes after the fact, of course, because after the murder, that's when the investigation is. That's when you're most likely to uncover more stuff. But part of what we were needing to do is prove intent prior to the murder
Mm.
and say without a doubt that there was intent prior to the murder. And a lot of that came up for me. What made me feel comfortable was that she was speaking in code to Charlie even prior to the murder being committed, and innocent people do not speak in code.
Yeah, innocent people don't get that slip of paper and and just walk away. What about learning that and we're going to wrap in just a second, but when you hear that Wendy drives by the crime scene on the morning of the murder, and it's basically I've just learned that it's like 7 miles out of the way. That's definitely a curious fact, right? I mean, you're from Tallahassee, but so you'd know better than me, but
My eyebrows perked up at that whenever they were speaking about it. I forget which witness it was during, but Trescott Drive is not a convenient way to go to get to the ABC liquor store. It's covered in, I run through that neighborhood quite a bit. Uh, it's covered in speed bumps,
Mhm.
and it makes way more sense to go through Benton Road to go down Centerville and turn onto Benton than it does to go through there. So all that by itself is already strange. Not to mention the fact that there's like four other liquor stores that are closer by.
Mhm.
And then whenever you see all the police cars outside of what was your ex-husband's home and what used to be your home where your children were just staying, me personally, I would likely inquire about that rather than just going to the liquor store.
Um, let me ask you it this way: if you're Wendy Adelson, would you be worried tonight, Evan?
I'm glad I'm not Wendy Adelson.
Listen, it was an absolute pleasure, much more of a pleasure than I ever expected. This is juror number 6, an historic juror now. He served on the Donna Adelson trial, otherwise known as Evan Higginbotham. It's got to be a British name, right, Evan?
It is. You nailed that.
So, Evan, I'm gonna leave the floor open to you. I mean, you're obviously wise beyond your years. It was basically 3 weeks of your life. Your final thoughts.
I mean, it was an awesome experience that I am incredibly thankful to have. It has fully changed my trajectory as far as my education, and I'm looking really forward to studying law. And once I eventually do get down the line of being able to say I'm a barred attorney, I'll have a really cool experience to look back on to say what got me into it.
That's awesome. And you know what? There is an organization called Justice for Dan Markel, and I'm going to connect you with my friend Jared Ross, because I think they're giving out some sort of scholarship money for this sort of thing for people who want to pursue the law in Dan Markel's name. So I'm not saying that they're going to necessarily going to happen, but I want to connect you. And on behalf of everybody, I just want to thank you for doing your civic duty, serving on the jury for that $15 or whatever it was a day. And I can tell how seriously you took it. So from all of us at STS Nation, Survive and Survivor, and everybody, honestly, in this country, these juries are incredibly important. We thank you for your service.
Well, thank you all so much for having me on. It's been a pleasure speaking to you regarding it.
Yeah. On that note, stick around for 1 second, Evan. Love you, America. Love you, Tallahassee. Justice for Dan Markel. And we'll see you on the flip side.